Sniffly, sniffly, sniffly. Okay, give me a minute. I'm tired. I hadn't actually planned on doing my review today. That's actually kind of a lie. I thought about doing my review today because I knew I would have makeup on and I would actually be dressed. So I was like, it's probably a good day to do it. But the best window in which to do it, I didn't do it. So here we are. It's super late and I'm doing it anyways. And my review is on Ransom Riggs' Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. I intended to do this series earlier because he released the final book in the series about, I don't know, depends on when I post this video as to how long ago it was. Let's go with a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, because I think I started posting in 2020 and he released it, I think, that Christmas. He published the final book in 2021 and I wanted to do the entire series then, but I didn't have time because that's 6 books, and I dug around and I found 4 of them. I need to figure out where I put The Desolation of Devil's Acre and then the other one that I'm missing, but I'm not looking right now. I will look later, and anyways, I have the book for today, I have the book for tomorrow, and that is what matters. As I said, today is the first in his Peculiar series, and I'm gonna preface this all by saying that if you read or if you listen to the audiobooks, please don't quit after the first one. The narrator vastly improves when he gets to the second book, but it is nails on a chalkboard getting through the first book. I don't mind the narration for the main character. However, his narration for all of the tertiary characters is appalling, and I don't know how he got away with it. I don't know how they published that because it is very, very, very hard to listen to. But I love this series. I think I discovered it pretty soon after it got published. And I really enjoy the fact that the whole series is based off of pictures. And so in that respect, I would recommend to try and read the books because he does include all of the pictures that he describes. So he does a decent job describing the pictures, just in case you aren't reading the book and so you actually know what he's talking about. But I think it is absolutely brilliant the way that he incorporated pictures into his book, because essentially Ransom Riggs was like, I've got really creepy pictures. How am I going to write a story about that? And some of these pictures are so random, yet he works them into the books in such marvelous ways. So I am extremely impressed by his creativity. I will say, and I know I'm jumping ahead of myself here, I preferred the initial trilogy to the subsequent trilogy. But I also, when I got to Desolation of Devil's Acre, I was like, what in the world is going on here? I'd completely forgotten certain aspects of the plot. And so I'm not going to judge things too harshly because I do need to go back and reread sequentially just to be familiar with everything that's going on. However, I think the first 3 were stronger. I am glad that he went on and did 3 more because I missed this world, but I thought he reached a bit. Anyways, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. Let me say that one more time. It is a YA book, sci-fi, fantasy, and it revolves around this kid named Jacob whose grandfather tells him tall tales. He gets a call from his grandpa and the guy is desperate. The problem is that Jacob's dad has stolen the key to the gun safe. He calls his dad and he's like, look, grandpa's going crazy. He wants his guns. Dad's like, just go check on him. So Jacob does, and he discovers his grandfather has been murdered. He sees this creature in the woods. From there, everybody thinks he's crazy. So he starts seeing a psychiatrist. Then he starts thinking, like, maybe I need to go to the place where my grandpa grew up, because his grandpa's last words led him to believe that this is somewhere that he needs to go, that he needs to go find the children's home in which his grandfather grew up. They get to this small English island, and Jacob discovers that all the tall tales were true, and that he is able to pass through something called a loop into another time, and he meets all of the children at the home, as well as Miss Peregrine, who is their keeper, only to discover that there is danger afoot. Their enemies, the whites / the Hologast, are after peculiars and have begun to invade loops. And a loop is essentially one day in time that is kind of frozen, and it is reset. So Miss Peregrine is an Embrin, which is a bird. Like, they're all types of birds, but they are women who mind peculiar children, who are children / people, because technically they're not children, but we'll get to that. They mind the children in order to keep them safe, because their abilities freak people out. And so in order to keep them from getting murdered, they basically provide them a safe haven. Spoiler, Jacob's psychiatrist is actually a white in disguise. And what a white is, so what had happened was only women can be birds. Only women are Embrins. Miss Peregrine's brothers joined this faction of dissenters who kind of wanted to be gods. They wanted to take over the world, so that peculiars didn't have to be in hiding. They decided to conduct these experiments in an abandoned loop in Siberia. And what comes out are hologasts. So it's possibly a primordial version of people. There's no clear idea as to what exactly a hologast is, except that it is a person that used to be peculiar. It was, this faction of people, these dissenters. The only way that they can sort of return to their form is by consuming peculiar children. And when they've consumed enough, they turn into a white. Hologast are invisible, which is where Jacob and his grandfather come in, because Jacob thinks he's a pretty normal dude. However, he is told, you wouldn't be able to get through the loop if you weren't peculiar, and what your peculiarity is, just like your grandpa, is you can see hologasts. So that is where Jacob becomes important. But as I was saying, it turns out that his psychiatrist, Dr. Golan, is a white. He's basically been stalking Jacob his entire life. It was his school bus driver. It was their lawn guy. It was a dude in his grandpa's neighborhood. Like, he's been around. He's been watching Jacob. And that does lead me to a question. And this is a broad question too, because part of the Embrin's responsibility is to safeguard peculiar children, but they also need to find peculiar children. So I'm like, how do you find a peculiar child? Like, do they give off some kind of radiation? Like, do they emit some sort of energy that you can just tell? Obviously, Jacob had told Dr. Golan all about this creature he had seen in the woods that nobody would believe him. So Dr. Golan encouraged Jacob's parents to allow him to go to this island and seek out the children's home and all that, so that he could follow Jacob and he could figure out where the entrance to their loop is, because they're all hidden. Dr. Golan is able to get in, and he captures Miss Peregrine as well as another Embrin who had come to them after her loop was raided. And this is something I'm kind of uncertain about. No matter how many times I've read this book, I still haven't figured out the logistics of it. Which reminds me, don't watch the movie. It's terrible. Jacob and his group of friends, they were trying to figure out who the white was. Like, they figured out that there was a white and a hologast on the island in Jacob's time period. One of the locals had been murdered, and Jacob and a select number of the children go, and one of the children has the ability to raise the dead. So they're talking to him when they are approached, when they're confronted by Dr. Golan, who reveals himself and reveals the hologast. They are then left. He leaves them to the mercy, or the lack thereof, of the hologast. But because Jacob can see the hologast, he's able to murder it. They go back to the loop. They discover that the white has captured Miss Peregrine as well as the other Imbrin. They chase him out to sea, at which point Jacob ends up killing him, but not before he throws the cage with the birds in it into the ocean. And then he and his love interest Emma try to rescue the birds, only to just about give up when the birds sort of like rise to the surface because they are atop a U-boat. This is where my confusion comes in. Maybe I have not read closely enough. Maybe I have never listened closely enough. But when they rescue Miss Peregrine, I don't see how they don't rescue the other Imbrin as well. And then there was a spoiler, like I can't give away that spoiler because it is a huge spoiler for the end of the first trilogy. I don't understand how this little event occurred, which actually, I don't know. Should I give it away? Should I not give it away? I won't give it away. But anyways, there is an event that occurs, which is a huge surprise when you get to the third book. And I'm like, how did all of this happen? How were they able to rescue one bird and not another? I think maybe the door of the cage was open when Golan threw it into the water. I don't really know. But I find it very confusing how they are able to rescue Miss Peregrine, yet they don't rescue the other Imbrin. I don't know how they got separated, I guess, is where I'm going with this. So that's kind of where we end with the U-boat escapes, Dr. Golan dies, and the loop timeline takes place during World War II, and the house is supposed to be hit by a bomb. However, because Miss Peregrine resets the loop every day, the bomb never actually hits. It doesn't detonate. Since Miss Peregrine cannot reset the loop, because even though they rescue her, she's unable to turn back into her human form, the loop expires, the bomb hits, the house is destroyed. Now the children are like, we gotta get moving, we gotta get out of here. So it ends with them off at sea in their boats, and Jacob has decided not to return to his own timeline, but to go along with the children because they want to rescue the Imbrins. They want to help in this new war. My first question here is, how do you find a peculiar child, especially if an Imbrin has to return to the loop every day to reset it? How can they be gone for any length of time? And then how do the whites find peculiar children? There are some things that are extremely obvious. There are just some abilities you can't hide. But for those that, like Jacob, who never have had in contact with a hologast, how does he know he has an ability? His grandfather was Polish, and this is something else I think is brilliant because he tells all these tales, yet they're actually pretty explainable in terms of legitimate history. So the monsters he talks about could just be the Nazis or all the children at his home. Okay, maybe he just sensationalized stories, or maybe the bird is just the name they gave for their headmistress at the home. Like, there's all these things that can explain away his stories into something believable. Abe, the grandfather, had been at some point, I think he was like 15 or 16 maybe, I don't know. His whole family had been destroyed in the war, and he had managed to escape, and he found his way to this home, which again, because not just because you are peculiar doesn't mean you have peculiar children. It's just hit or miss. So it's not like you're like, oh, I'm peculiar, mom, dad, what should I do? Where should I get educated? So I have no idea how he figured out he was peculiar if, like Jacob, he has never had a chance to see a hologast, or like Jacob sees a hologast and doesn't know what he's seen. So I don't know how he finds Miss Peregrine, but he does. He begins a relationship with Emma, and then eventually he's like, I gotta get out of here. I can't stay any longer. He goes and he fights in the war, and then he ends up in America, and he kind of strings Emma along. He's like, I'm gonna go prepare a place for us, blah, 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 blah. He ends up, like, doing a Dear Jane letter, like, leave me alone, I found someone, I've started a family. So, my other question is, how did the Whites find him? How did the Whites know about him? After the explosion that turned the people into hologas, and then they began turning into Whites, maybe because they knew by consuming peculiar children they would turn into Whites, ergo they needed to find more peculiar children. So maybe they just knew of him because they knew of Miss Peregrine's loop. But then how did they locate him in America? Because I'm assuming that's why they were watching Jacob, because they thought maybe if Abe was a peculiar, his descendants could be peculiar. But I was just like, how in the world? I mean, like, I know how it was done because we get all the pictures, so I know that's why it's there. But my brain is like, how does this work? Which is another question I have. So the loop, it essentially freezes the children in time. Even though Emma looks 16, she's like 88. So I understand that since it's the same day over and over, you're not necessarily aging, because none of the townspeople aged, because this one day in time is this one day in time. Although the peculiar children are the only ones who remember it. It's only continuous for them, whereas the townspeople, they just live this day over, not realizing they've already lived it. Which is kind of funny to think about it, because you could be like hundreds of years old and not know it. Because the thing is, Jacob keeps leaving his clothes at this house. And it occurred to me when his dad was like, oh, you lost your other jacket? I was like, so does that mean when the loop resets, his clothes, like anything that he left there, disappears? But then how can the children have continuous memories? If the day is constantly resetting, how can they grow anything? Because nothing in the village is continuous. So is it kind of like being close to the eye of the storm, so you're exempt from certain elements of this magic? Why, if everything around them grows, do they not grow? Why is it that they don't necessarily grow emotionally or mentally? They're still very childlike. Not that these are bad things, they're just questions that I found myself asking this time. That then reminds me, there's a very large cast of characters. It's a little confusing, a little disconcerting, because we get pictures of children who are never in the book. Which, it's okay. Honestly, that does not bother me. Because I can just assume they're there, but they don't have a prominent role. So we're just not going to talk about them. But Riggs, so we have Jacob, Emma, Enoch, Horace, Millard, Bronwyn, Claire, Fiona. There's like 2 others, I think. There's 10 or 12 children that we actually know about. But when we first get to the house and Jacob sits down with everybody for his first meal, you get the sense that there's like 25, 30, there's a ton of kids in this book. However, at the end, only this 10 or 15 escape. And of course, like, you wouldn't have it any other way. You don't want any of the children to die. And then, of course, 30 children cannot escape at one time. Like, it's just not feasible. But you do get the impression that there are far more children there, either by the picture or just by the way that it's presented. Like, Jacob is at the table with essentially these characters that are named, that are important enough. And then there's other kids who are on kitchen duty, who come out bringing all these platters of food. When Dr. Golan goes into the loop, you're told all the young children are tied up, or they put all the children in the basement. And I'm like, all the children? There's like 5 or 6 people with Jacob alone. So when you say all the children, you make it sound like aside from the handful of main characters that were left behind, there's a ton of others with them. But there's really not. Like, if you think about it, everybody who was at that home escaped with Jacob. So it's interesting, and this is going to be getting a little bit ahead of myself. For me, that's kind of where this whole picture thing goes a little awry, because he finds these great pictures and he creates a great world around them, but then he obviously realizes he has too much. He has to figure out how to weed out these characters, and there are quite a few characters that are so minor. I'm like, ugh, I like them, but honestly, there's just too many of them. So did we have to have them? And so in the next book, in Hollow City, he leaves some of them behind. We don't even see them till the end of or midway through the third book. And then there's one character who we don't see till the second trilogy. And I'm just like, I've forgotten all about them. I don't even know who they are. One character in particular, the one that we don't see, we don't know her fate until the second trilogy, she doesn't speak. So we get very little of her. And so my problem is, why do I need to care about what happens to her? If she's so inconsequential that Riggs said, I'm going to weed her out and literally leave her behind, did we need her in the first place? Except that we had all these really great pictures that he wanted to talk about. Well, and then there is Bronwyn. I think I forgot her, but Bronwyn is a strong girl. She has a brother who had, like, Abe tried to leave the house. He's like, I'm done with this. And that's another thing. So the children can't go into the future or the present because they will age forward. Like, all their age will catch up to them within a certain amount of time. But they can leave through their own loop. So if they're in 1946, they can go off into 1946 without a problem. So that's what Bronwyn's brother tried to do, and somehow he got killed by a white or a hologast, and then the children were able to recover his body. And because the loop continues to repeat, he doesn't decay. They just keep him in a room like he's sleeping, and then every now and again, Enoch will stick a heart in him and revive him, and I was like, I thought he was really interesting. I wish I could have gotten more of him, because we do learn about the old man. So when Jacob and his father get to this English island, there is an old man who had been found in the cairn or in the bog, and he had been mummified, and we learned this was Bronwyn's brother. I just thought that was really interesting, and it's a paradox of sorts, because Jacob knows nothing about this. However, it turns out that he's the entire reason the old man existed, because when they decided to leave the island at the end of the book, they buried him in the bog. So he became the old man. So it's like, without Jacob, there would have been no old man. I love how things go in circles in this book, where it's like one thing couldn't have happened without the other, but then that couldn't have happened with the thing. So it was really clever. I enjoy the writing of this book. As I said, the narration, please don't judge the rest of the series on the narration. I honestly do not know how the narrator got so good from book 1 to book 2, because I believe there was only a year in between the two, so he must have been studying up on his accent work, because he was horrible in the first book. I feel like there's more. I'm totally on Emma and Jacob's side. Like, I'm digging their ship. Although I feel Jacob in his Olive, that's her name. Claire and Olive. This is Olive on the front cover, by the way. But I do feel Jacob's pain when he says, does Emma like me for me? Or does she like me because I remind her of my grandfather? It's kind of gross and twisted, where it's like, talk about dating your best friend's girl, we'll talk about dating your grandfather's girl. I'm like, ooh, gosh. There are things that happen later in the series that I'm kind of like, oh, but right now I'm enjoying them. I like Emma's spirit and her fight. She has the ability to call up fire with her hands. I'm gonna sign off now, because I got a little bit of cold and I'm tired. And if I've forgotten anything, I'll talk about it tomorrow. So, win-win for all of us. That's the great thing about doing these series day after day after day. If you've read Miss Peregrine, which one's your favorite? Who's your favorite character? Can you explain to me the thing about the bird, please? Yeah, thank you. About Miss Peregrine. Yeah, So that'll be super duper sweet. And I will see you later. Bye.